Hi, everyone. Welcome to my talk about setting up an accessibility program in an imperfect world. Before we start, let me quickly introduce myself. As Toby already said, I'm Larissa. I'm a senior software developer. I've been with Thoughtworks now for almost 3 years. And I've been not only working there as a UI developer, but also as a UX designer. And as you might think, I'm very passionate about inclusive design and web accessibility, and that's why I'm here today. And I guess most of you are here for the same reason. And I would also assume that a lot of you already have some experience with accessibility, or at least a rough idea on what it is, or you've been already listening to this very inspiring talk of my colleague Sarah about shifting your mindset on accessibility. But just to make super sure we're all on the same side, let's start with a quick introduction on what do I actually mean when I talk about accessibility. So in very short, accessibility is the degree to which an environment, product, or service is usable by as many people as possible. And this can really apply to anything, if it's the real environment we're actually living in or some tool we're using. But as I'm working in IT, I'm mostly referring here to the accessibility of websites or apps or similar. But I guess you can also apply this to a lot of different products that you're currently working on. But still, what does that really mean, usable by as many people as possible? So let me give you an example. This is a screenshot of a very famous shopping website. And accessibility for this would mean that as many people as possible are able to select this t-shirt in their proper size and put it in their shopping cart. So I guess for a lot of you, including me, this would mean using your mouse, clicking on this drop down, clicking on your size, and clicking on the add to back button. But for accessibility, this should also mean that even when you're not able to use a mouse, maybe do it to some tremor in your hand or so, you should still able to do the exactly same thing with just using your keyboard, like tabbing through the page, going into this drop down and adding the shirt to your bag. And even when you're not able to see this website at all, you should still be able to get all of this content here read out by some assistive technology and be able to select the proper size, even the proper color when you can't see it, and put it through your shopping cart. So in the end, this means in a perfect world, everyone should be able to shop this t-shirt here online in the way that is most convenient to them and the abilities they have. And as we are mostly the ones building those products, like e-commerce websites, in a perfect world, that would mean we're always able to build our products in a perfect, accessible way. And to be able to do so, I think we would need 4 things. So in a perfect world, everyone in your project would just be convinced that accessibility is the right thing to do. And accordingly, accessibility would always be your priority number 1 for your project. Also in a perfect world, you would be able to loop in accessibility right when you start thinking about this product you build. You would be able to start from a perfectly clean slate. And also you would have a team full of accessibility experts to get this work done. Unfortunately, I'm not living in this perfect world, and maybe a lot of you also don't. In fact, none of those 4 things is true for the project I'm currently working in, but I still managed to set up an accessibility program there. And this is what I want to share with you today, how I did this. So let's do the reality check for our statement number 1. Everyone would be convinced accessibility is just the right thing to do. So I think that's kind of true. At least in my project, people are not pure evil. They didn't want to exclude anyone on purpose from the product we were building. But most of them were simply not aware that the product we were building will also be used by people requiring accessibility. And in general, when starting to talk about accessibility in my project, I've realized that most people had a very limited understanding of disabilities. And these are some of the statements I've heard that made me aware of this. We are building a tool for experts. They won't be disabled. shouldn't we focus on the majority of our users first before looking into the needs of one super small, maybe not even existing user group? We are selling cars. Blind people are not driving cars. So why should we make our tool accessible? We are building a tool for internal use in our company, and we don't have disabled employees. So maybe you heard some similar statements in your project too, when it comes to accessibility. And this might be a clear sign that your colleagues don't really understand the dimensions of disabilities and that they might need some help with that. And this is at least what I figured for me in my accessibility program, that I have to at least convince the stakeholders in my team that people facing disabilities are not a small minority, but a relevant part of our user group, and that they can actually make a big difference on the success of our product. And these are some of the arguments I've used for that. So in general, the amount of people facing disabilities is way higher than most people would expect. The World Health Organization states that 15% of the world's population live with some form of disability. And this number is also constantly growing as the population gets older. And these are just the people that are living with a permanent disability. And I think permanent disabilities is mostly what first comes to our minds when we think about disability, like being born with only one arm or becoming blind due to an accident. But there are also a lot of other disabilities that are hindering your users for some time to use your product in the way they would usually do. Temporary disabilities are, for example, injuring an arm in an accident. So this will eventually heal, but for some time, you're not able to use that arm. And for that, you're, for example, not able to use a website in a way you would usually do. But it might be still very important to you that you can use that website in that time. And there are also situational disabilities that are just for a very short period of time. Like, for example, the sun is shining very heavily on your screen and you're not really able to see much on the screen. And this is really just for a short period of time, but maybe it's still very important to you in that time that you're able to see what's on the screen. And with all those different forms of disabilities, it's actually just a matter of statistics to understand that your product will be very likely used from people that requiring accessibility. And that is also crucial for the success of your product to fulfill those user needs. Because people with disabilities are estimated to have nearly $500 billion in spending power. So there's really a great business opportunity here, or a missed one, if you just don't fulfill those needs and don't make your product accessible to them. So with all of these arguments and some more, I managed to actually convince the stakeholders and mostly everyone in my project that accessibility is important for our project and we should do it. And at first they kind of just made me assume, okay, now we agree on this, so it's our priority, we're just going to do this. Which brings me to reality check number two, sorry. So we kind of all agreed now that we want accessibility for our product, that we have to do this. But we also had to do so much other stuff that was always more important, like being compliant to some security standards or releasing the new feature in time for our project deadlines. So I had to understand at some point that accessibility will never be the highest priority for us. There will be always other ones, and I had to deal with this. So what I did then was thinking about, okay, maybe I just have to make this so clear and simple, the path to success for accessibility, that it might not even be the most important priority. And I did this in 3 steps. So first of all, we chose a basis together, like a standard that is very clear, that we comply to and that we commit to strive for this on a long-term basis, like on the whole product. And it would be even better if you do this for your whole company. And the good thing is that you don't have to invent this standard by yourself. It's already out there. So what is out there is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and this is a set of international accepted standards for accessibility. And it's really used by a lot of companies and a lot of national laws to do exactly this, setting a standard. And there are different versions that build up on each other. There are different levels of conformance, and you can basically choose out what you think is currently feasible and suitable for you. But the most common standard currently used is the 2.0 standard on a AA level, because 2.1, sorry, not 2.0, 2.1 is like the latest stable version, and AA is usually considered as a good conformance level, as single A is considered as too low, and AAA is usually considered as too high for a whole project and only used for some features. So this is what you usually go with. And so we set this as a clear standard and also communicated this in the whole project. Okay, this is where we want to go. This is our standard we're striving for. And surprisingly, this already had an impact. So after we communicated this, people actually came to me and told me, this is so nice, because I tried on an individual basis to loop in some accessibility in my work for quite some time, but I didn't know what to comply to. So this already helped the people that were already thinking a bit of accessibility. But for most of them, this was clearly not enough, because I don't know if you ever looked at the web content accessibility guidelines, but they are very detailed and very extensive, which is a great thing, but it can also be very overwhelming. So these are some screenshots from just 5 of the criteria that the standard has. And in total, in the version 2.1, there are more than 85 of those criteria. So it's a lot. And I couldn't really expect busy people with deadlines to have the time and capacity to really go into this and look at it step by step and say, okay, this is what I have to do now. I had to break this down and make it more understandable. So what I did in the second step is really trying to shrink this standard down according to our needs. So I really looked into what are we currently building, and do we need all of those criteria for that? And for example, our product is currently not using any video or audio data. And there are 5 criteria in the web content accessibility guidelines that are just about audio and video. So I didn't have to consider those criteria for now, because we simply don't have this. So this already made it a little bit less, which was a good thing. But still, it's a long, long list. So I also had to make this more comprehensive. So in the last step, I created a checklist out of this. And my goal was really to make this very hands-on and usable in different phases of the product process. So in the end, my idea was really that people could lay it next to their desk when they are working and really check it step by step. When they're planning for a new feature, when they're designing it, when they're developing it, when they're testing it afterwards, it should be always very easy to use, very easy to look at, and you can just pull it out and do it. And this is an example of how this looks like. So as you can see, I did this in steps. So you can clearly see for what is this step. It's about keyboard accessibility. I also have this recommendation of who might be the best person to look out in their workflow for, or who can test this. And also a quick explanation on how do you test this by like tabbing through the page. And then you have those clear checks. Is this fulfilled or not? For example, do have interactive elements like buttons, a focus indicator, so you actually know where you're at the page. And then you can clearly say, okay, this is working or not, I fulfilled this or not. So it's relatively easy. And when you don't understand it, you can always go for more details. But in total, there are just 14 checks. So it's not too much to ask for and to just go through this for busy people, I would say. And what I also did is making this measurable. So in the end, you can basically check those checks and you get a score, like the percentage of how many scores you have passed. And this is really something you can measure and set as a goal. Okay, for now, we want to reach like 60% or 80%, and in the end, 100%. And even though I would not say you can ever say it that easily, that my product is 100% accessible, because there will be also some testing with users needed to really say that, I think it's great to like looping it in project goals and make it more visible and transparent how you can reach the path to success. So I had this checklist and I felt like this is a good step to not even need to have accessibility as priority number one, because the path to success is very easy. But I still had a big problem because we were already in the middle of product development. We already developed a lot of stuff that was not accessible at all. And also, I did not have the chance to just say, okay, we just stop and go back and do this all again. So I really had to get this somehow on this moving train of a product that has already been in development for almost 1.5 years at that point without really considering accessibility. So I made a plan how I get this on the moving train of our product. And first of all, I said, okay, let's not look back, but rather make sure we're not building more broken stuff. So this was really the priority number one, that we kind of avoid to just add up on this pile of broken stuff and strive for building all the new features that we're building with accessibility already included. In this, I was trying to reach with really like looking into the workflows of our teams, what are they currently doing, and aligning accessibility measures with that. Because even when you get some time to just do accessibility, which is great, what happens afterwards? Because you have to do this in a constant way, and you have to do this for new features all the time. So if you have to spend such a significant amount of work on it, it will not be sustainable. It cannot last. So I really try to like think about how can this be realistic to include this in a normal working day. And here you can really use a lot of the ways of working that are already in place. For example, a lot of our teams are using stories with acceptance criteria that define if this feature is done or not. And you can easily loop in accessibility checks here. For example, when you have an acceptance criteria that says, when I do this and then I click on this button, then this should happen. And you can extend this to also make this accessible. So it's not only about clicking, but also when I do this and then I use my keyboard, this should happen. Or when I do this and use my screen reader, then I should understand what is happening here and this should happen. So this can be an easy way of remind people by doing it that they should do it in an accessible way. And also for the testers later on to define, okay, we did this in an accessible way, this is now done, or this might be not done because we still have to do some accessibility. Or personas, some teams were working with personas and looking back at them when they were planning for new features. So it can also be a good idea to just also have personas with disabilities. So you already think of them right when you start with a new feature. And also, even though you cannot test everything for accessibility in an automated way, you can still reduce the effort of manual testing with including some automated testing in your pipelines when you have a team with like really strong automated testing setup. So this is what we focused on first. And then after this, we kind of looked also back on what we have done before. And with the checklist I've already created, we started to run audits for the features we've already built. And our aim was really to just do this once for what we have built, like have a big pile of things, of issues we found and add them to the backlog. And then we know what has to be fixed, and then we can do this step by step. And this is then what we're currently doing, like quarter for quarter, we're just doing an accessibility-wise 2 things. We're fixing step by step the issues that we found from the features we already built. And on the same time, we're trying to not add more issues to that with baking in accessibility for new features. And this is where we're currently at. This is what we're doing all the time. And really trying to include this in our workflows for the new features, as I said, with those measures in our workflows. For the issues, maybe you can do one found issue per sprint, or some teams have like a snack box for smaller issues that team members can pick up when they have only like an hour free time to work on something. There can be also some accessibility issues fixed in just 1 hour. And this is what we're doing. And in the end, like the long-term goal we didn't reach, what we're striving for, is really to say this fixing gets less and less until we're at the point that we can say we're accessible by default. So we're really kind of confident that our filters are built with accessibility included. This might not always work. There might be always some bug, but I think that's just normal. But it shouldn't be your goal. Your goal should be to really say, okay, we don't need to audit features, especially for accessibility later on. We don't need to fix them later on because we already looped this in and we're not creating new issues. So this is the plan. We're already following this, but in the beginning, I just had this plan. Like basically, I convinced my stakeholders, let's do accessibility. We have the standard, we have the checklist, we have this plan on how we do it. And they liked it. They said, okay, let's do this. But I still had a problem because I didn't have a team full of accessibility experts to just get this work done that I was aiming to do. Because the people in my project, they didn't like just build stuff without accessibility on purpose. They did it because they didn't know better. And that was really giving me a hard time because we also didn't have the capacity or time to like really skill up all of them in depth on accessibility. And we couldn't also just replace all the teams because they were doing a good job. And then I started to think about the way how I am working as a software developer. And usually, to be honest, most of the things I'm doing, I don't really know by heart how I'm doing them. Like mostly I'm just Googling stuff. I just have to know what to look out for, and then I research, and then I get it done. And I think that's not only true for my role, but also for most other roles. For example, designers, like when you think about a new feature that you want to build, you search for inspiration in the web. You look how other products have done the same thing, how they solved it. And so I was thinking, okay, maybe we don't need accessibility experts to really build accessible products. We just need the basis for them that they actually know what to look out for. And for those, I think we only need 3 things. So we really need to make them aware that there can be issues, that they have to look out for them. And I think this is easily happening with like making them familiar with the different interaction patterns different people use. So rather of investing in an in-depth upskilling of like all of these techniques of accessibility, we did rather a short training on how to use our product in different ways. For example, like how to really use a screen reader, because I think that's really important. Because when you don't know how to use a screen reader, and then you test your product with a screen reader, you will think everything is broken, even though it's not. You just don't know how to use the tool. And the same with like just switching from time to time to really like just use your keyboard on your tool. And this should just be a normal thing. You should be so familiar with it. And it's just normal for you that when you develop something and you look into it, if you see that it's working, you just also occasionally use your keyboard and not only your mouse. And what we also did is like really encouraging the teams to have a cross collaboration on this, to really work closely together as designers and developers to help each other. Because I think also a lot of issues can be already avoided with that when designers just don't deliver visuals, but they also think already about, okay, how should the developers build this flow? How should this work when someone is using a keyboard? How should they go from A to B and tell this to developers? And the other way around, because there's also a lot that developers can just do from making it accessible, just from like the techniques they're using, but they have to tell designers how this works so they can think about this, what they don't have to do in the designs, but maybe just have to think about later on in the process. And what we also did, which really helped to keep this in mind, is just like really letting the people experience some barriers themselves. So really like giving them a website that was maybe not the best example and told them, okay, let's do this, like shop a t-shirt in here with only your screen reader. So to really get this in their heads, okay, this is how frustrating this can be. And this really helped. And people were just like, okay, I'm just thinking about this now and I'm building this new feature, and I always have to think about how do I do this with a screen reader? And even though when they don't exactly know how to build this accessible for a screen reader, then they can reach out, they can research for it. But I think the most important thing is that they have this in mind. Yeah, and this kind of worked. Like for me, this is actually the accessibility program we're driving for a few months now. Without living in a perfect world, we still have the same circumstances, but we managed to do this. I mean, it's not always perfect. Some teams are still not done with the audits because they don't have the time, but they audited a few of things. They're aware of a few of things. A lot of them included accessibility measures in their way of working. Sometimes it still happens that a team says, okay, we don't have the time to look at this. We're just prioritizing this feature without accessibility now. But I would say we're on a good path without having to like change our project setup in a perfect world first. And I think you can do the same thing too when you're also not living in a perfect world. So a few hints on here are, when not everyone agrees accessibility is important for your product, you can make them aware that people facing disabilities are a relevant part of their user group too. And when accessibility is not your priority number one and will never be, you can make accessibility goals easy to understand and straightforward to reach, so teams consider to pick it up anyways, because it might be a quick success and win for them, which is not always true for a lot of other things in software development, at least. And when you cannot start with accessibility from a clean slate, focus first on not building more broken things by including accessibility in your workflows. And don't stress too much about what you already built, just fix it step by step. And when you don't have a team full of accessibility experts, maybe you don't need one. Maybe you just need to enable your team to work with accessibility in mind by upskilling on interaction patterns, like how to use a screen reader, how to use a keyboard, how to look at a page without any colors in there. Yeah, and this is already it. I hope this helps some of you to also start with accessibility when you don't have a perfect world at hand. And it was the time for questions now.
Thank you so much, Larissa. That made up a lot of ideas and insights. And yeah, to all the folks, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. And I see there's one comment I want to pick up and put in front of you, Larissa. A reality check is really a thing. What are your thoughts around this? Has there been some circumstances where you struggled with it or succeeded, or some stories you might want to share?
Yeah, I think one reality check I didn't add in here, but is maybe still the hardest thing, is that the stakeholders in my team have still this question: when will we be done with accessibility? Like, when will we reach this? When will we be at 100%? And I think this is still something I didn't find a solution for, because I don't think accessibility will ever be done. It's something you have to continuously work on and really have to include it. And I kind of just hope that this will become at some point just natural, because my stakeholders are also not asking when are we done with usability. And I hope at some point with accessibility it's the same. But I think that's still a very hard point for me to reach.
Awesome. You already took away my second question, because I was just thinking about you might encounter exactly that one a lot. But what do you do if people ask that? I mean, it's also a mindset shift, right? Do you take them on a journey and build on small successes, as we always do? What's your recommendation there?
Yeah, I think I can also understand this for like when you're more in the management section of something, you have to like present some goals, you have to reach for something, you have to plan for something. And I think then like something like this accessibility checklist that is really like a standard for us for now, that we just say we have this as a score and we want to reach this, can be a good start to just say, okay, for now, when everyone reached this, we are done. And I mean, this might be kind of a lie, but I think it's a good start. And then later on, and maybe when really every team reached its 100%, I would hope that you're already at a state that it feels kind of natural and that teams learned enough to just do this by heart and not just say, okay, throw everything away now, what I was doing before, and not do it again.
Yeah, I get it. You're setting a goal and you're moving towards it, right? There's one more tool-based question we have in the chat. Is there go-to tools? Are there go-to tools for making accessibility goals more easy to achieve?
Go-to tools in the sense of like, I mean, there can be a lot of different tools. I think there are tools in like forms of pre-made checklists that you can use. There are a lot out there in the world. I personally really like the one from IBM that has a really good checklist on different parts, also like divided in the content and more the technology part. There are also a lot of go-to tools for really auditing in a more automated way. When you say, okay, maybe I don't want to start with a checklist, there are tools like, for example, Lighthouse that Sarah also showed us before, where you can just run an automated accessibility audit and get like a score. This could be also something you can start with to just say, okay, we want to reach this score like of 100% with all our pages. There are a lot of go-to tools for like doing this in a more technical way when you want to like include it in your pipeline. There are the so-called XDev tools, which is something that are doing automated accessibility checklists in your pipelines when you really want to integrate it in a tech way. Yeah, and there are for sure also a lot of tools that can ease you and help you with like working in an accessible way. For example, again, in development, there are a lot of tools like really linters that show you basically when you write a piece of code, okay, this is missing some accessibility things. Like, for example, when you would write a piece of code that includes an image and you don't provide an alternative text that is read out for people that can't see the image, you would get automatically an error. You need this alternative text or something like this. And there are also, on the other hand, tools for designers that can help you with this. For example, like there's a mode in Sketch where you always design in grayscale. So you automatically design for colorblind people. So there's a lot out there. You just need to figure out what is best for you and works for you.
Yeah. Awesome. I have to say the next question made my day because those of you who saw us having a few tech problems earlier this morning. Larissa, to your talk, one question. How do you keep your spirits high when things are not so perfect, and how can I learn from that?
Well, that's a really good question. That's a really good question. I try my best. It's not always easy. But I think it's the small successes. What really keeps my spirits high is those reactions from the teams when they say, oh, this was easier than expected, or, oh, I didn't notice, I want to change this. And personally, what keeps my spirit really high, and I think this is a point in time that you can relatively easily reach, is that accessibility became like the end argument for basically any discussion we had, because we're now at this point, we have this accessibility standard. And when we say, but when we build it this way, it's not accessible, then everyone kind of says, okay, we have to do this different. This does not always mean that they then prioritize this. This also often means like, okay, we cannot do it now. But I think this shift in mindset is really something that takes some time, but it happens. And I really saw this happening from exactly those people that told me these statements in the beginning that you said, like, we don't want to do this. Accessibility is not important for us. And they really have this mindset that they always say, okay, I agree, this is not accessible, and this is why we can't do it. And this huge mindset shift is really like, in all of these situations, I try to remember this and say, okay, we made it here, we can make it even further.
I like that very much, and I will write that down for me. In an imperfect world, it's about the small successes on the way. And Larissa, another question we have on the chat is, what are other strategies that work for you and your team to spend and invest more time in accessibility when the stakeholders say it's not the priority?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can understand. It's actually, we all started with this kind of setup. This is the part I left out. we really started very small with this in our team because we really struggled in our team that there were no accessibility requirements and there was no interest from our stakeholder, but we still did want to do this. So we really started to sneak it in exactly with this. We had like 2 tiny acceptance criteria in some of our stories, make this keyword accessible. And we had like some linting tools in our code setup. And this didn't like take more work. And I think this is why our stakeholders didn't say anything at the beginning, because we worked in the same speed kind of and did the same things. And then others saw that we were doing this and said, oh, this is kind of nice. We want to do this too. So I think this is really a good thing we did. And we always came back to this, that we had kind of this proof of concept in a very small team that we said, hey, we're already doing this. It's not completely unrealistic.
So, and you would also say that is if none of the arguments that you can bring to the table work, this is the way to go that you have experienced. And then make it a showcase or demonstrate, or for example, let them experience reality. Is that something that you encountered?
Yeah, I think there are different strategies you can drive here. Like either say, okay, we're doing it in such a small way and showcase it later that stakeholders can see it's not that much more work. You can also go the really hard way with really going with the hard arguments. For example, in the EU, it will be a legal requirement for a lot of products in a few years that they are accessible, and you can really get fined for that. So you can really also come with that argument that I feel is kind of like the end for a lot of discussions, or also with like really discrimination, which is like really at least in Germany, quite a tricky thing, and where you can also get sued. For example, when you're building an internal tool in your company, this is not accessible, and then you can't hire people that need accessible tools. So this can be really tricky from a legal side. So this can be also like the hard part to go. Yeah, depends. But I think it often more helps to just show your stakeholders that it can work without like screwing up your complete concept and going completely backwards.
Yeah, but I love to see the options, right? Because as you say, it depends. And in any environment and mission we're in, we have different priors and different mindsets of the people. And so it's good to have like ideas and methods, which alley to try out to convince them, right? And so, yeah, Larissa, it was very nice having this inspiring talk, rounding the track in the end towards, closing the YConf for this year. If there are any more questions around this, around tools, around stories to share, insights to Larissa, we'll have the chat open on the swap card as we did in the other talks as well. Other than that, we'll closing this talk and see each other with the rest of the panelists in the closing of the YConf. Thank you, Larissa. Thanks everyone for attending.